Thanks for tuning in today to Look Before You Speak. We have a very special guest. We're out here in Stevensville, and Bobbie McKibbin, very gifted artist in this region and well known throughout the American West, and has been so kind to have us here in her studio. And we're going to go in and take a look at some of her work.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So, and how long have you been out in the Bitterroot?
We started coming to the Bitterroot in 1992, and then we built the addition onto the house in 2002, and then we moved here full-time in 2007.
It's just been wonderful, and you've had a huge impact on and an influence in this area, and I think your approach to the landscape and the materials that you use to interpret and compose from the landscape, and I'm really anxious for people to see some of your work today.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to show the work.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Well, let's go inside.
Let's go inside. You know how galleries are. It's foreign territory for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I don't belong there, so I shouldn't go in, you know, kind of thing.
Well, and I think the other thing is just step away, don't make judgments about things, and let's just kind of look.
Sure.
And your judgments are natural.
Yeah.
But as you're looking, just kind of absorb and see what this artist is doing. And
you bet. You know, Steve, what's very interesting about this is when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my father, this is in North Philadelphia. I grew up in the wilds of North Philadelphia. and my father gave me a set of pastels, a beautiful set of pastels. And I remember I would do my pastel drawings at my little drawing table, and I would pin them up on the wall, and I'd invite my friends and family to come in and look at them. So here I am about 50 years later, and things haven't changed very much. The room has gotten a little larger. But I'm still inviting my friends and people to come in and take a look at what I'm doing.
Well, we're thrilled you're here.
Yeah, indeed. And what's interesting is, you know, I did grow up in Philadelphia, and the name of my studio and gallery is Drawn West Studio. And the reason it's called Drawn West Studio is because I was born in Philadelphia, went to school in Ohio, I taught at Grinnell College for 31 years, and then I moved here. So I've been drawn west. And
your landscape selections are very rural.
Yes.
And and also just grounded in the earth. I mean, there's a real feel for.
Yes, indeed. I really try to be a faithful reporter, because I think, in spite of what we're doing, the planet is still amazingly beautiful. And the beauty is everywhere. You don't have to go very far. You just have to look. You have to slow down and just look. And maybe that's my job.
And well, I really appreciate you saying that, because it's one of the emphasis of this program is just coming to the realization that all of us have judgments inside of us. But when we go visit art or artist studios, that really our responsibility is to do that very thing, is slow down and have a level of empathy that as you're looking, just look and see and attempt to understand and empathize with the artist.
Right.
Is there one particular you would like to start with?
Well, there is. I do have a favorite.
Okay.
I do have a favorite in here, and it's over on this wall. When I received my teaching job at Grinnell, I was the printmaker. But it was a small liberal arts college, so you teach everything. So I taught design, I taught drawing. I was the only person to teach drawing. And that is my first love, is drawing.
Yeah.
And so, frankly, when I painted, I didn't enjoy painting, because somehow I didn't feel in touch with the materials. The brushes were not a natural extension of my arm or my mind. But the pastels, you know, you're literally touching them and working them and so forth, and I love that. So pastel is perfect for me because I'm drawing, but I'm painting at the same time. And one of my favorite places to work is Yellowstone. First time I was in the park was in 1996. I was on a sabbatical, and we were in the park in October. And that was a wonderful time to be in the park because it had kind of emptied out. And I remember walking around and seeing the thermals, and it was about 7 o'clock at night, and Cheryl and I are standing in this secluded area, and I hear this sound. I hear this ch, 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 and I thought, what is that? And it was about 6 bison walking along towards the thermal, and it was that ground of the thermal with their hooves, and the light was just incredible. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I should backtrack again just a little bit back to North Philadelphia, because my brother Alex is 11 years older than I am, and actually he's a painter as well. But he had this thing called a Viewmaster, and Viewmasters had these little discs that you could put in, and he had all the national parks, and one of the parks was Yellowstone. And I remember looking at that thinking, I mean, I never thought in a million years that I would ever get to a location like that. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that I've gotten, not only have I gotten to the location, but I've had the joy of actually doing work from that location is like, it's a dream come true. And what I think is special about Yellowstone is, I think many of us, when we look at the world, or nature, or rural settings, sometimes people will say, "Oh, look at the scenery," and I think, "Oh, what a word to use," you know. But it's just there for the taking. It's sort of dormant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But when you go to Yellowstone, and especially around the thermals, it's not dormant. It is alive. It is sputtering. It is belching. It is steaming. And you know, when the steam comes around and hits you in the kisser, it's stinky.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you stood there long enough, you'd get sick, you know?
Yeah.
And I think how cool that the world the earth itself is very much alive. It reminds us of how alive the planet really is.
Sure.
Yeah. So this image, I think this is considered a fairly large image for a pastel. And I just love the, there's a certain kind of quietude in this, and the atmosphere is very heavy. And it's a very simple drawing, actually. You know, you just have 3 bands. You have the foreground, and then the middle ground with the steam, and then the heavy atmosphere. And working as a realist, I love the idea that we can take our medium, whether it's oil paint or, in this case, chalk, and turn it into steam, for example. Because pastel is relatively opaque.
The paper seems to really accept what you're doing.
Right.
So you've done all this research and figured out.
Sure.
You can't just get some bond paper and use.
Right.
You've figured it out.
Well, one of the reasons if we can, this is another one of my favorite images.
We can walk
here.
over this way.
Yeah. This is Arches cover stock. It's just called cover stock. And I became aware of it because of being a printmaker. I used to print my etchings on the Arches cover stock. So this is in South Dakota, the Badlands. We also printed on a paper called Reeves BFK. And I remember starting to work my pastels on the Reeves BFK. It's a very bright white paper. It's a beautiful paper, but it kind of frays. It's soft. So when I drag my chalks across it, it would kind of almost become like a Kleenex. And it's like, well, that's not good. You know? So the cover stock is really durable. Tough. And what people have to realize is, you know, a lot of people will use the word talent, and I always tell them, "Oh, I hate that word." And they go, "What do you mean?" And I think a lot of people think that you just sort of come up and you do this, and in one's, you know, you're not struggling. It just sort of happens. And that's so far from the truth, because the reality is, I start all my drawings with a charcoal drawing, and I do that for a couple of reasons. I do that to initiate the image, because there's nothing scarier than a white piece of paper. So get something down, but because, and I base this on Degas. Degas did a whole series of monoprints, and then he would print what was called a ghost image. And about 50% of his pastels are done over top of his ghost images of his monotypes. And the reason he did that is when you work off of a grayish kind of base, you can work back and forth. You can work light, and then you can work dark. at the same time. If you're working on white paper, you can only go one direction. You can only take things darker. But when I was working this particular drawing, I remember this area in particular just fought me, just was awful. And so I have single-edged razor blades. And I would take the razor blades, and because as you continue to draw, the pastel almost starts to slide across itself.
Right.
And the paper no longer is
Accept it.
So you scrape it out,
Oh, wow.
and it opens up the grain of the paper again, and then you can continue to work. Well, this area was probably scraped out about 5 times until I got something that seemed like it worked, And of course, the reason for this drawing is here's this barren landscape that's yellow and orange and brown, and then here are these little tufts of bright green grasses growing. And I thought, how amazing that on this little outcropping we've got that grass that's so bright.
Yeah.
So I love that contrast. Yeah.
And you consider yourself a realist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But what's interesting is when I worked as a printmaker in graduate school, I worked completely abstractly.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone said to me, well, you're going to go off and make landscapes, I'd say, oh, please, I'm making serious art here, So I think that working as an abstractionist has helped me maybe as a realist, because
Sure.
The way I look at things, I look at shapes and
composition
colors and composition, and of course it's what it is, and I want to celebrate that. But I also want to celebrate how I'm looking at it,
Sure.
and how I'm dividing it, and that's why I always frame my pieces and I float them in the mat here, so people can see the edge of the drawing and say, these are the choices that I made here. The other interesting thing is, I was leaving a show that I had at Grinnell, and there was an older woman coming out of the gallery, Steve, and she said, "Is that your work?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, it is." She said, "Well, from far away it's not half bad, but from up close it's perfectly horrible." Yeah. And of course, being the smarty pants that I am, I said, "Well, honestly, I'm trying to make it horrible from a distance, but I haven't mastered that yet." So I took her by the hand. And I brought her back into the gallery, and I said, "Okay, here's the situation. When you look at my drawings from the distance, they have kind of a photographic kind of feel to them, and you like that." She goes, "Yes." And then when you come up close, you're disappointed because we have all these marks. And I said, "I'm telling a story, and the story is important, but the telling of the story is important as well.
Yeah.
So it's a drawing, it's not a photograph, and I want you to know that I was here, and that a human being made this image."
Well, and it's so very much like nature itself. The closer you get to soil, the more it looks like soil.
Right.
And you're not able to draw soil.
There's an awful lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm hoping we can get up here close to this, because these marks are just really very, very wonderful.
Right.
And so, you get, 3 inches from the ground.
Right.
This is the way the ground looks.
Right, exactly.
And,
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you said, soil, and how do you, someone asked me one time in an interview, there was a piece that I had, and it was snow. And they said, "Well, how do you draw snow?" And I said, that's not the right question, because it implies that there's sort of a generic snow, right?
Yeah.
But that's not true at all. It depends on the time of day, it depends on how much snow, it depends on the wind, all kinds of things. So to say, how do you draw snow? Well, it depends on what snow you're looking at, right?
Sure,
and,
sure.
And that's another thing about my work, and I hope this is true. I try not to be formulaic. I try not to say, "Oh, I'm drawing red rocks, so here's my 6 tried and true colors that I know that I can draw red rocks with, and apply it." Sort of like baking bread or making widgets or whatever.
Sure.
No, so I struggle. Part of the reason I struggle is, I think, because I try to, I put that charcoal drawing down, and then I put some pastel color down, and then I sit down and I look, and I'm trying to respond to what I have, and then I jump up and I add, make changes, and then I sit back down and I evaluate. So I try to think of it as a jazz improvisation, that I'm sort of having this interesting conversation with this image, and the image is telling me what to do, and the world is telling me what to do, and maybe my fingers are telling me what to do. So it's kind of noisy. It gets kind of noisy in the studio. Yeah.
And I think one of the refreshing things, probably you brought to the region and area is, your skill in working with pastels, but, pastels are really old.
Right.
I mean,
right,
they go way back.
Oh yeah,
And do you have some favorite early artists that worked in pastels? Like certainly Degas, but even before.
Yeah. Well, even like Chardin. There's a pastel. Another thing that happens with pastels, people ask, well, do they last? How do they hold up? Mm-hmm. And there's a self-portrait that Chardin did in 1775. It's in the Chicago Art Institute. Looks like it was done last Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's so fresh. It's so amazing, And the deal is, pastels can be, I think when you say pastels to people, they get sort of a notion of what pastels are. We even say things like pastel colors, and this kind of beautifully tinted roses and yellows and so forth and so on. But pastels can be noisy and expressionistic and nasty, or they can be incredibly subtle. So it's just as malleable as about any medium that I could ever think of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you're talking about the realism of this, but I see this as really pretty emotional too. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is this really, your expression, your individuality comes out in this. Sure. And you can kind of see that in this. These are your kinds of signatures.
Right.
And
and as I said, I try not to be formulaic because that's going on in here, but my favorite drawing, one of the ones that we just looked at, notice there aren't hardly any marks in that drawing at all, because that day and that subject matter did not require that. I could have drawn that like I drew this. I could have made marks all over it, but that would be imposing myself way too much on the story. So it's an interesting, it's about making decisions. What wears you out about art, making art, or maybe even looking at art sometimes, is the decisions that you're making. It's not the physicality of getting. I mean, that's true too. You have to be there and you have to actually draw and so forth. But it's am I making the right choices? Mm-hmm. And the choices are open-ended, right? Mm-hmm. So you start with, a blank sheet of paper is like, what an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And then you start to narrow it down as the drawing starts to form. In some ways you're opening doors, but you're closing other doors, right? And you're going down this certain path. And then you think, okay, I'm done. And people ask, how do you know when you're done? Good question.
Yeah.
And again, it's a choice.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're making a smart choice again, right?
Can we look at this piece here?
Yeah.
Is this okay?
Yeah, and that's on the Missouri.
Yeah. Wow. And this is really, of the three pieces we've looked at so far, three really different palettes.
Right.
Three really different points of view and perspective, and really demonstrating your skill in composition. Like you're either looking here or there, or kind of.
Right.
And this is a more rectangular.
Format.
Yeah. And really different palette.
Right. Yep. And what's exciting to me is sometimes what isn't there. Letting the viewer, we fill in an awful lot of this is just sort of a suggestion of sort of what's going on because of the time of day and so forth. And then we were talking about abstraction. Why did I do this image? Probably because of this wonderful wedge of cloud and how it echoed against this edge of the hillside and then echoed again in the water, And you could take this drawing and you could probably turn it as a vertical and it would still be an interesting image.
It just shows an incredible sophistication and maturity, light and dark, and playing around with complements.
It's important to know that I just have made a lot of pastel drawings.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so you just sort of show up and you just keep making them. And I would tell my beginning students, they were so precious about what they were doing, right? And now that I've done as much as I have, I have the license not to be so precious, and that if it's not working, to try something completely, you know, what happened? So I used to say to them, in your mind, say something like, what happens if? Like my students would come over to me, well, what if I'm going to do this and I'll do that and do this, what do you think? And I go, I don't know, but let's find out.
Yeah. I think the older artists get, the more confident they are in their decision making.
Right, right.
You know, they know
Yeah.
when to give it and move on.
Right.
So it's a quicker process.
Right.
And I
right.
think as a beginning art student particularly, and I can remember being an art student and really spinning my wheels.
Sure.
And going, well, how do I move forward with this?
And you want every piece to be so good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you invest so much in every piece. And sometimes my students would come and their piece would not be very good. And I would try to be very kind and so forth and so on. And they'd say, well, you don't understand, it took me a really long time.
Yeah.
And I'd say, you know what, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares how long it took.
Yeah.
You know, if it took 5 years or 5 minutes, it's, you know.
That's like saying, it took me 3 hours to get on the bike.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, let's get on the bike.
Yeah. And about this decision-making process, what's interesting is I don't work one piece at a time, because I think that would be too narrow, and I would be too focused on the singularity of that particular piece. So I get maybe 8 or 10 pieces going at once. And I do that for practical reasons, because sometimes you walk into your studio and you don't want to go into an existing drawing because you just don't feel that you have that confidence that day maybe. But I could maybe start something. I could tear some paper down and I could get a charcoal drawing going. And I used to tell my students, just do something every day. Or come in your studio and just look. Just look.
Sure.
Or clean your it's interesting, I have to clean my pastels. Which some people wouldn't fully know about, but you know, as you work, your hands get very dirty, and you're picking up colors, and you're working with them, and so forth. So after a while, you have this pile of pastels, and they all look sort of grayish. And you might pick up a gray, and then hit it, and it's a bright red that's been covered up with all this dust that you've gotten on it.
And it's a stroke of genius.
Yeah, they go, wow, look at that bold stripe. Exactly. Who in the hell would do that? You know? Well, yeah, someone who didn't know what color was there. You know? Yeah. So I use I either
put a John Deere tractor there.
Yeah. Exactly, Steve. So I either use like grits or rice flour. And you dump your pastels in there, and you move them around, and it's a mild abrasive, and they come out bright and shiny.
Oh, they do? Wow.
They come out bright and shiny again.
That's a great tip for people.
You always like your new children the most, and this is a new child.
Okay. Is that the Bitterroot?
No, this is the Firehole River in Yellowstone.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
These marks are just beautiful here. You've really captured this, and look at how that is, the white over the dark. So you'd probably, started with
I put
dark and worked light.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I did. Yep, I did. Yep. So, Can
you get that okay? Okay, let me get out of your way.
Or, or if there's one that you can get better than others, we can talk about that one.
This is fun.
Yeah. So I like the format. Again, I like this kind of long, narrow format. And I like the noise or the activity of the trees against sort of the sparkly water, and sort of the mystery of what's in the dark foliage, and then the river. Yeah. And I'll tell you the truth, working the river, I started with, like, one of the differences is when I do water, one of the things I'll do is I'll put down charcoal because, and for example, in a sky like this, there's no charcoal there, right? And that's blue. But I don't do a river like that because the river is denser than the sky. So I put the charcoal in, and then I brought sort of a light blue across it because I was kind of nervous. And I didn't really know if I could do it. And then I started to do a little piece, and then it was like, oh my God, can I put all these little dots in, or will they just look like dots and not like what the water's doing? And I scraped it out a couple of times and reworked some areas and so forth. You know, it's funny, working all this time, Steve, with pastel, you put the color down and then you can leave it or you can rub it. And you can blur the edges or you can mix color and so forth and so on, okay? Well, it took me about 15 years to figure out. So I'd be working and I'd put a mark like this down, and it would almost sit on top of the image. It would not integrate with the image. So I finally learned after about 15 years, instead of doing this, I did this.
Ooh.
And I would just tamp it a little bit. So I'd go
Secure
along,
it.
and I'd just sort of tamp it, and that would knock off the edges visually, and sort of integrate it, weave it into
The surface.
into the water, into the trees or whatever. So, you know, if I'm not sure if I don't like what I'm doing, I'll come in and I'll just sort of tamp down what's going on. And then if I go too far with that, then you can come back in and reinvigorate. And
Yeah.
so it's this marvelous kind of dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, I had this sculpture teacher, and he would get up, or, you know, we would be critiquing, but he would turn around and he'd say, just remember, surface is everything. Because, you know, it's like people aren't, and you're like thinking of this. I think it's a wonderful thought. I just love it. And I kind of flash back on that point of like, here we're just focused on form or expression or storytelling. And he would just say, surface is everything.
Right, there you go.
And, you know, it's like, none of us had been thinking of it. And like this, when I look at it, you know, I can just feel you doing that. And I just love how this green and blue over the darker blue and then the light on top. Oh, and this entire surface is just wonderful. It's just wonderful.
Thank you, Steve. And and I think it's that immediacy, that gesture,
and
that look.
You're saying this is one of your most recent ones?
Yes. Yeah, because last fall I was invited over to Yellowstone. It was the first plein air event that they had in Yellowstone, which surprised me because the park goes back to 1872.
The Moran brothers.
Yeah. So there were 14 artists, and I was invited to go over and work plein air in the park, and it was magical.
That's really
it was
great.
Magical. Yeah.
I hope that they continue that kind of relationship with artists, and you know, the Missouri River did that at one time.
Right. And I know other national parks,
Yeah.
Zion has been doing it, and a lot of parks have been doing it for quite some time. And I guess they are, because I've been invited back.
That's so great.
In September.
That's really great.
In September, yeah.
I was mentioning earlier this year, you were talking about how people look at the park and visit and consume and look at nature. And my wife and I noticed that in Zion, people weren't really looking at the park, but they were taking selfies.
Yes. Oh my God.
And so they're like, they have their back to the.
I know.
And
I was
going, what's going on here?
I was just in Yellowstone a couple of weeks ago. Cheryl and I had an opportunity to spend about 4 days, and exactly, we were in Norris Geyser Basin, on the boardwalks, and everybody's not looking, they're all taking selfies. And I thought, really? Really?
You know, we only have so many heartbeats on this earth. And I often think, you know, standing around the geysers or some piece of natural beauty and just absorb it. And, you know, you're sharing your point of view too.
Yeah.
So it's so similar in us being able to absorb nature and really look at it.
And there are times when I go to these places and I don't take my camera because I just want to experience it. You know, I really, and I think if people would put their phones away, honestly, take a snapshot. Okay, fine.
Okay.
But put it away and just look. Just sit for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. Again, I go back to my teaching, and how quickly we look at things, right? So I would say to my students, you know, I'd show them an image of a great painter, perhaps, and they'd look at it and they'd say, "Oh, I don't like it," or whatever. And I'd say, "Well, you know, you looked at it for 5 seconds, and you passed that judgment."
Yeah.
So I put it in their context. I said, "Well, when you bring your portfolio to me for evaluation and for a grade, I'll look at your drawings for 15 seconds and make a judgment." You know.
Well,
so again, it goes back to your point about this whole program about slowing down. And I think we live in an age, don't we, with the technology, it's about faster is better.
Conditioning us and consumerism.
We're moving faster. We're, you know, how often do we I've seen people, I've done it myself, your computer is slow and you get terribly upset. You go, what the hell's going on? You know, come on. And that impatience, I think, is a disservice.
Yeah. Well, I think getting to the point where we understand that our judgments, our aesthetic judgments, are natural, and they're going to come, and just set that instinct aside.
Right.
Just set it aside and go,
right.
You know, I am here to absorb what's in front of me and set my judgment aside. And my judgment might not change.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference.
Well, and I think it's it would be perhaps a gradual situation that at first you don't think you've changed at all, and then over time, if you do it enough, who knows where we go. And I would say this about the world and the natural world and what we're doing to it. And people say, you know, we have to save it. We're not going to save it if we don't even see it.
Yeah. That's right.
You're only going to save what you know and what you care about.
Yeah.
You know, so in some very small way, I hope that my images make people see it in a way, and maybe it's a little less threatening. You know, there's a lot of people who aren't going to go to a place, aren't going to be there, and if they were there, they might not be very comfortable. If they live in a city or whatever, and so maybe coming into a gallery and looking at a pastel drawing of it. It's pretty safe.
You know, there is this history, and it relates to Thomas Moran and Yellowstone. You know, the artists, the images of these remote places helped establish the parks.
They did.
They helped establish and reinforce an empathy of transcendentalism.
Yep.
Nature has something to do with our human spirituality.
Yep.
And now I think we're in a very strange time where in some ways we're loving nature to death. We're overreacting, and we're trying to treat it like a candy bar or something. We're trying to chew it up and consume as much of it as we can, and try to have, you know, a recreational vehicle for every man, woman, and child in North America. And you know, what do we do with all the human impacts on these areas, which can be profound.
Indeed.
And so we're wrestling with that. But I think that the artists have a way of alerting us, just like your work. It's alerting us to, you know, these are very special places, and we need to stay connected to them.
Well, it's interesting what you were talking about, people coming into loving it to death and so forth and so on, just being in Yellowstone. You know, there's 3 million people that go to Yellowstone every year now, or more. And actually, when you're on the boardwalk, it's pretty noisy. I mean, there's a lot of people around, and a lot of things are going on. A lot of selfies are being taken and so forth. Interesting, with the pastel drawing, there's a quietude There's a quietude about it. All that has been screened out and is not present. In fact, I looked at the photographs that I took from Norris, and looking at the photographs, you'd swear to God I was the only person, it wasn't intentional, but you'd swear to God I was the only person standing in Norris geyser basin. And it's strange because that wasn't the case at all. So when I work from these images, there's going to be again, and it was lovely. It was more of the atmosphere of the first one that we looked at, sort of the gray palette, which I
So are people coming by watching you draw?
Yes, during the plein air event, we actually wear tags, you know, and visitors are told
that's great,
that we're friendly, and
so you don't bite,
and people do come up, and I love that. I love that, and we interact, and they see what's going on.
That's great.
And it kind of demystifies, in a way. You know, I'm part
artists aren't alien beings. Right.
And that's part of the reason I was a founding member of Artists Along the Bitterroot, the studio tour, because we open our studios. So this space was open, my studio upstairs was open, and it's like, hey, come on in, take a look at what it takes to do what we do and where we do it and how we do it. And every artist on the tour makes very different work, and their studios, their spaces accommodate what they do.
Well, we've had a wonderful visit here today, and I just want to thank you for opening this up and allowing us to, you know, look at work, appreciate work, and I hope people
thank you, Steve,
are in touch with you through this program and say hey. And
I would say, please, I'm open. Please come down and see me if you feel like it. I would enjoy people coming.
Okay.
Thank
you
Steve.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.